Welcome back to our channel, your go-to source for the most spine-chilling true paranormal encounters. If you're a fan of terrifying stories that keep you up at night, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and smash the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest videos. Today, we've got a collection of 10 horrifying true stories that will make you rethink venturing into the unknown. From haunted cabins to possessed dolls, these tales are guaranteed to send shivers down your spine. Let's dive right in. 1. Haunted by Shadows, a terrifying night in an abandoned cabin. Mark, a thrill-seeker with a love for urban legends, had always wanted to explore the infamous Blackwood cabin. Located deep in the Oregon woods, the cabin was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had once practiced dark rituals there. He convinced his friends, Emily, Jake, and Sarah, to join him for a weekend adventure. They all dismissed the ghost stories as mere campfire tales. The group arrived at the cabin on a chilly autumn evening. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of pine. The cabin, with its creaking wooden floors and dust-covered windows, had an eerie charm. They decided to set up a campfire outside before heading in for the night. As they sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories, they started hearing whispers. At first, it was faint, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder as the night wore on. The whispers seemed to come from the dark forest surrounding them, calling out names and phrases that sent shivers down their spines. Around midnight, Mark decided to go inside the cabin alone to grab more firewood. The moment he stepped in, the temperature plummeted. He felt a heavy presence behind him and turned around to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The figure had no discernible features, just a mass of darkness with glowing red eyes. Mark's heart raced as he backed away, but the shadow moved closer. He could hear a low growling noise, like a beast ready to attack. Mark stumbled out of the cabin, yelling for his friends. When they rushed in, the shadow was gone, but the cabin was freezing cold. Over the next few days, the group experienced a series of disturbing events. They heard footsteps echoing in the cabin at night, saw objects move on their own, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. One night, Emily, one of Mark's friends, woke up screaming. She claimed she saw a figure standing over her, whispering her name in a guttural voice. On another night, Jake and Sarah ventured into the woods to collect kindling. As they wandered deeper, they heard their names being called from all directions. Panicking, they ran back to the cabin only to find the door locked from the inside. After what felt like an eternity, Mark managed to unlock the door, and they tumbled in, breathless and terrified. Determined to uncover the source of these hauntings, Mark researched the cabin's history. He discovered that the land was once used for occult rituals. The original owners of the cabin were a secretive group who conducted dark ceremonies, summoning entities from the other side. The spirits of those who participated in the rituals were said to haunt the area, trapped between worlds. Mark found old photographs and journal entries in the cabin's attic, detailing the horrific events that took place there. The entries spoke of summoning shadowy figures and making pacts with dark forces. The more they read, the more they realized they had disturbed something ancient and malevolent. Terrified and sleep-deprived, the group decided to leave the cabin. As they packed up, they found strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that weren't there when they arrived. Mark took one last look at the cabin before they left and saw the shadowy figure watching them from a window. They drove away as fast as they could, but the experience left them shaken. Mark later discovered that similar stories of shadow figures and hauntings were reported by other visitors, all who ventured too close to Blackwood cabin. Mark and his friends never spoke of the incident again, but the memory of those shadowy figures and the terror they felt remains etched in their minds. They learned the hard way that some places are better left undisturbed. 2. The Haunted Asylum, a night of unending terror. The Redgrave Asylum had stood abandoned for decades, crumbling monument to the inhumane treatments once performed within its walls. Jack, paranormal investigator, had long been fascinated by the asylum's dark history. He convinced his team, Lily, Tom, and Marie, to join him for an overnight investigation. They arrived at dusk, the setting sun casting long shadows over the decaying structure. As they set up their equipment, they could feel the weight of the place bearing down on them. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. As night fell, the team split up to cover more ground. Jack and Lily headed to the old patient wards, while Tom and Marie explored the basement. Almost immediately, Jack and Lily began to hear faint cries and whispers. Following the sounds, they were led to a room where the temperature suddenly dropped. A quick check with their thermal camera revealed the unmistakable outline of a figure in the corner. Meanwhile, in the basement, Tom and Marie were dealing with their own horrors. They found an old operating room, complete with rusted tools and bloodstains that had never been cleaned. As they set up their cameras, a loud bang echoed through the room, and the door slammed shut behind them. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and shadows began to move on their own. Jack and Lily's walkie-talkie crackled to life with frantic messages from Tom and Marie. Rushing to the basement, they found the pair trapped and visibly shaken. Once freed, they all decided to stay together. Poltergeist activity increased, objects were thrown, and unseen hands tugged at their clothes. Desperate for answers, Jack reviewed the asylum's history once more. They discovered that the most notorious area of the asylum was the children's ward. Here, patients were subjected to cruel experiments under the guise of treatment. Many children had died under the horrific conditions, and it was said that their spirits still roamed the halls. Determined to communicate, Jack conducted a séance. Almost immediately, they were surrounded by a cold, unnatural wind. Shadows grew thicker, and a cacophony of voices filled the air. The spirit of a young girl appeared, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She spoke of pain and betrayal, begging them to leave. Terrified, the team decided to leave. As they gathered their equipment, the asylum seemed to come alive with rage. Doors slammed, lights flickered, and the building itself seemed to groan. They ran, not daring to look back until they were safely outside. Jack and his team left the Redgrave Asylum, haunted by what they had experienced. The evidence they captured was undeniable, proof of the tormented souls trapped within. They vowed never to return, respecting the spirit's plea for peace. 3. The Cursed Forest, Encounter with a Malevolent Spirit. A group of 5 friends, Anna, Ben, Chris, Dana, and Eric, decided to go camping in Blackwood Forest, a place shrouded in mystery and local legends. They had heard the tales of people who entered the forest and never returned, but they were eager for an adventure. As they set up camp, the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. There were no birds, no insects, just an oppressive silence. That night, around the campfire, they heard what sounded like a distant, mournful cry. Dismissing it as an animal, they went to bed. The next morning, they discovered strange symbols carved into the trees around their campsite. Ben, an amateur historian, recognized some of the symbols as ancient runes used in rituals. They decided to explore further, hoping to find the source. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the temperature dropped, and a thick fog rolled in. They found an old stone circle, covered in moss and more of the strange symbols. Suddenly, they heard footsteps behind them, but when they turned, no one was there. That night, back at camp, Anna woke up screaming. She had a burning pain on her arm, and when they checked, they found the same symbols from the trees etched into her skin. One by one, the others discovered similar marks on their bodies. Panicked, they decided to leave the forest. But as they tried to find their way out, the fog grew thicker, and they seemed to be walking in circles. Ben recalled an old legend about the forest being cursed by a witch who was wronged and that her spirit trapped intruders, marking them as a sign of her vengeance. Desperate, they performed a cleansing ritual Ben found in his research, hoping to appease the spirit. As they chanted, the fog lifted, and they saw the ghostly figure of a woman in tattered clothing. She seemed to watch them for a moment before fading away. The forest gradually returned to normal, and they finally found their way back to the campsite and out of the forest. They were exhausted and marked by their experience, both physically and emotionally. The friends left Blackwood Forest, each bearing the scars of their encounter. They vowed never to speak of it again, haunted by the knowledge that some legends are true and some places should be left alone. 4. The Phantom Hitchhiker, a road trip gone wrong. James, Lisa, and Matt were on a cross-country road trip, enjoying the open road and the freedom it brought. They decided to take Route 66, hoping to experience some of its legendary Americana and perhaps a few ghost stories. One night, driving through a desolate stretch of road, they saw a young woman standing by the side, hitchhiking. She looked distressed, so they decided to give her a ride. She introduced herself as Claire and thanked them profusely, but she spoke little during the ride. As they drove, Claire seemed to become more relaxed. She mentioned her house was just a few miles ahead. Suddenly, without warning, she vanished from the back seat. Shocked and confused, they pulled over and searched the car, but she was gone. Determined to understand what happened, they drove to the nearest town and spoke to the locals. They learned that Claire had been a real person, a young woman who died in a car accident on that very road many years ago. Since then, she had been seen by numerous travelers, always disappearing before reaching her destination. As they continued their journey, strange things began to happen. They heard Claire's voice on the radio, saw her reflection in the rearview mirror, and even found her belongings appearing in the car. They realized that her spirit was still with them, unable to move on. Seeking to help Claire find peace, they researched her life and death. They found out where she was buried and decided to visit her grave. There, they left flowers and said a prayer for her soul. They also visited the site of her accident, placing a memorial marker. That night, as they camped out nearby, Claire appeared to them one last time. She smiled, thanked them, and then faded away. The car, which had felt heavy and oppressive, seemed to lighten, and the strange occurrences stopped. James, Lisa, and Matt continued their road trip, forever changed by their encounter with Claire. They learned that some spirits need help finding peace and that sometimes, the best way to move forward is to help those left behind. 5. The Poltergeist House, objects moving on their own. The Johnson family moved into their new home, a charming old Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood. Sarah, her husband Mike, and their 2 children, Jessica and Tommy, were excited about their fresh start. But from the moment they moved in, strange things began to happen. It started with small things, objects disappearing and reappearing in odd places, unexplained cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. Sarah dismissed these as the quirks of an old house, but the activity soon escalated. One evening, while preparing dinner, Sarah saw a plate fly off the counter and smash against the wall. She called Mike, who was equally baffled. Over the next few weeks, the activity intensified, furniture moved on its own, lights flickered, and loud banging noises echoed through the house at night. Desperate for answers, they contacted a paranormal investigator. The investigator, Linda, arrived with her team and set up cameras and sensors throughout the house. That night, they captured footage of objects moving, doors slamming, and even a shadowy figure walking down the hallway. Linda researched the house's history and discovered that it had once belonged to a man named Samuel, who had a violent temper. Samuel had died in the house under mysterious circumstances, and it was rumored that his spirit still lingered, unable to move on. One night, the poltergeist activity reached a terrifying peak. The family was woken by the sound of shattering glass and found the living room in chaos. Furniture was overturned, and objects were strewn everywhere. In the midst of the chaos, they saw Samuel's apparition, a menacing figure with a twisted expression. Linda conducted a cleansing ritual, urging Samuel's spirit to find peace and move on. The atmosphere in the house grew tense as they felt Samuel's resistance. After a final, intense confrontation, the house fell silent, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The Johnsons slowly rebuilt their lives, the poltergeist activity ceased, and the house finally felt like a home. They kept Linda's number handy, just in case, but hoped they would never need her services again. The Johnsons learned that sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried, and that helping restless spirits find peace can bring peace to the living as well. 6. The Demon in the Mirror, a deadly summoning ritual. Teenagers Josh, Emily, and David stumbled upon an antique mirror at a local flea market. Intrigued by its ornate design and cheap price, they decided to buy it, unaware of the dark history attached to it. They took it to Josh's house and hung it in the basement, their usual hangout spot. Emily found an old book of spells and suggested they try a summoning ritual for fun. They gathered around the mirror, reciting the incantation. At first, nothing happened, but then the room grew cold, and the mirror's surface rippled as if it were water. That night, Josh was awoken by whispers and saw a dark figure standing in front of the mirror. The figure had glowing red eyes and a menacing grin. Panicking, he turned on the lights, but the figure was gone. The next day, he told Emily and David, who dismissed it as a bad dream. Over the next few days, they all began to experience terrifying occurrences. Emily saw faces in the mirror, David heard his name being whispered, and Josh found claw marks on the walls. They realized they had unleashed something evil and decided to get rid of the mirror. They attempted to break the mirror, but it wouldn't shatter. Instead, it seemed to absorb their energy, growing darker and more ominous. Desperate, they turned to the internet for help and found a ritual to banish the demon back into the mirror. Performing the ritual was their only hope. They gathered around the mirror once more, chanting the incantation. The room grew cold, and the demon appeared, fighting against the banishment. The lights flickered, and the air was filled with an unearthly screech. With one final effort, they managed to complete the ritual, and the demon was sucked back into the mirror. The mirror shattered, releasing a gust of cold wind that knocked them off their feet. The pieces of the mirror lay on the floor, lifeless and powerless. Josh, Emily, and David learned a hard lesson about dabbling in the unknown. They vowed never to mess with such things again and disposed of the mirror's remains, hoping the demon would never return. They moved on with their lives, but the memory of the demon in the mirror haunted them, constant reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. 7. The Witch's Curse, a night in the Enchanted Forest. Alex, Marie, and Jake loved exploring remote locations. They decided to camp in Ravenwood Forest, a place known for its eerie beauty and dark legends. The locals warned them about the witch's curse, but they laughed it off as superstition. They set up camp and enjoyed a peaceful evening. As night fell, the forest seemed to come alive with strange sounds and shadows. Around midnight, they heard a haunting melody echoing through the trees. It was both beautiful and unsettling. Marie wandered off to investigate the source of the music. She found a clearing with an old stone altar and strange symbols carved into the ground. Suddenly, an apparition of an old woman appeared, her eyes glowing with malice. Marie froze in fear as the witch cursed her, promising that none of them would leave the forest alive. Marie ran back to the camp, her face pale and trembling. She told Alex and Jake about the witch, but they were skeptical until strange things began to happen. Their campfire went out, their supplies were scattered, and the temperature dropped drastically. That night, they all had the same nightmare of the witch chanting in an unknown language, summoning dark forces. They woke up to find the symbols from the clearing carved into their skin. Terrified, they decided to leave immediately. As they packed up, the forest seemed to close in on them. The path they took to enter was gone, replaced by dense, impenetrable trees. The witches' laughter echoed around them, mocking their attempts to escape. Desperate, they found the old altar again. Alex suggested performing a counter-ritual he had read about. They gathered around the altar, reciting the incantation. The witch appeared, furious and screaming. The ground shook, and the forest howled in rage. With one final chant, the witch was engulfed in a blinding light. The forest grew silent, and the path reappeared. They ran as fast as they could, not stopping until they were safely out of the forest. The trio never spoke of Ravenwood Forest again, each bearing the marks of their encounter. They learned that some places are truly cursed, and that some legends are best left alone. Their experience in the Enchanted Forest taught them a valuable lesson about respecting the unknown and the power of ancient curses. 8. The Ghost Ship, a Maritime Nightmare. The crew of the Sea Serpent, cargo ship, was accustomed to long, lonely voyages. But this trip was different. From the moment they set sail, the air was thick with unease. Captain Morgan, a seasoned sailor, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The first night at sea, strange things began to happen. Crew members reported hearing footsteps and seeing shadowy figures on the deck. The ship's instruments malfunctioned, and the compass spun wildly. One night, while patrolling the deck, First Mate Jackson saw a figure standing at the bow. Thinking it was a crew member, he approached, only for the figure to vanish before his eyes. Jackson reported the sighting to Captain Morgan, who decided to investigate. Digging through the ship's logs, Captain Morgan discovered that the Sea Serpent had a dark history. It was involved in a tragic incident decades ago, where a storm had claimed the lives of many sailors. Since then, it was said to be haunted by their restless spirits. As the voyage continued, the hauntings grew more intense. Objects moved on their own, and disembodied voices whispered in the darkness. The crew grew fearful, and morale plummeted. Desperate for answers, Captain Morgan decided to hold a séance. The crew gathered in the ship's mess hall, and a medium was brought on board. As they attempted to contact the spirits, the room grew cold, and a ghostly apparition appeared, warning them of an impending disaster. The ghost's warning came true. A massive storm hit, tossing the ship around like a toy. The crew fought to keep the ship afloat, but the spirits seemed to work against them. Captain Morgan realized they needed to appease the ghosts to survive. Following the medium's advice, they performed a ritual to honor the dead sailors, offering a piece of the ship's cargo as a sacrifice. The storm began to subside, and the spirits gradually faded away. The Sea Serpent limped into port, battered but intact. The crew, shaken by their ordeal, disembarked with a newfound respect for the supernatural. Captain Morgan vowed never to set sail on the Sea Serpent again. The tale of the Sea Serpent became a maritime legend, a warning to all sailors about the power of restless spirits and the importance of respecting the dead. 9. The Haunted Hotel, a stay you'll never forget. Sarah and her husband, Tom, decided to spend their anniversary at the historic Grand Oak Hotel. Known for its luxurious rooms and rich history, the hotel also had a reputation for being haunted. They laughed off the ghost stories, eager for a romantic getaway. Their first night was uneventful, but strange things began to happen the next morning. They found their belongings moved, the TV turning on by itself, and cold spots in their room. The hotel staff dismissed their concerns, saying it was just part of the hotel's charm. As night fell, the activity intensified. Sarah saw a figure standing at the foot of the bed, only for it to vanish when she turned on the light. Tom heard whispers in the bathroom, but found no one there. They decided to explore the hotel and learn more about its haunted history. They discovered that the Grand Oak Hotel was built on the site of an old mansion where a tragic fire had claimed many lives. The spirits of those who perished were said to haunt the hotel, unable to move on. They spoke to other guests who had similar experiences, confirming their fears. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah and Tom organized a seance with a group of curious guests. As they contacted the spirits, the room grew cold, and a sense of dread filled the air. They learned that the spirits were trapped by a powerful force, unable to find peace. That night, the hauntings reached a terrifying peak. The room shook, lights flickered, and ghostly figures appeared. Sarah and Tom felt an overwhelming sense of despair as the spirits cried out for help. They realized they needed to perform a cleansing ritual to free the trapped souls. With the help of the hotel's manager, they conducted the ritual, offering prayers and burning sage. As they completed the ceremony, the atmosphere lifted, and the spirits slowly faded away. The hotel grew quiet, and the sense of unease disappeared. Sarah and Tom's stay at the Grand Oak Hotel ended on a peaceful note. They left with a deeper understanding of the paranormal and a newfound respect for the spirits. They shared their story with others, hoping to bring awareness to the restless souls still wandering the earth. Their experience at the Grand Oak Hotel taught them that some places hold on to the past and that helping spirits find peace can bring comfort to the living as well. 10. The Possessed Doll, a Child's Worst Nightmare. Young Emma received a beautiful antique doll from her grandmother for her birthday. The doll, with its porcelain face and delicate dress, quickly became her favorite toy. But from the moment the doll entered the house, strange things began to happen. Emma's parents, Karen and John, noticed the doll seemed to move on its own. They would find it in different rooms, its eyes following them. Emma started talking to the doll as if it were a real person, claiming it spoke back to her. One night, Karen woke up to find Emma standing by her bed, holding the doll and speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. Terrified, Karen shook Emma awake, but the strange occurrences only grew more frequent. The doll seemed to exert a malevolent influence over Emma. Desperate for answers, Karen researched the doll's history. She discovered it had once belonged to a girl named Abigail, who died under mysterious circumstances. It was rumored that Abigail's spirit was trapped within the doll, seeking vengeance on the living. Emma's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would have violent outbursts and claimed that Abigail was making her do things. The family decided to seek help from a paranormal expert, hoping to free their daughter from the doll's grip. The expert, Dr. Whitmore, confirmed that the doll was indeed possessed and suggested performing an exorcism. The family gathered in the living room, placing the doll in the center. Dr. Whitmore began the ritual, chanting prayers and sprinkling holy water. As the exorcism progressed, the doll's eyes glowed red, and it seemed to come to life, thrashing about. Emma screamed as if in pain, and the room filled with a chilling wind. With one final chant, Dr. Whitmore banished the spirit from the doll, which fell lifeless to the floor. Emma slowly returned to her normal self, free from the doll's influence. The family buried the doll, hoping it would never torment anyone again. They were left with a newfound respect for the supernatural and the dangers it could bring. Their ordeal with the possessed doll taught them that some objects carry dark histories and that protecting loved ones sometimes means confronting the unknown. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more true paranormal encounters, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had a similar experience. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on.